Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully you're here for the Missouri Bumble Bee Atlas training version 2. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes here. Going to give people a few minutes just to sign on. Thanks for joining us. Okay, it seems like most people have signed on, so we will go ahead and get started. Just real quickly, my name is Rich Hatfield. I'm a senior conservation biologist for the Xerces Society. I coordinate our bumblebee conservation programs, which right now means that I'm managing 3 Atlas projects. The Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Atlas Project, the Nebraska Bumblebee Atlas Project, and now this newly launched Missouri Bumble Bee Atlas project. We're really happy that you're all here for version 2 of the workshop. If you missed last night's workshop, we recorded it and we're currently processing that video, and we hope to have it uploaded to the website before the weekend so that you could watch it. And we'll try to do the same for tonight's version as well. Before we get started with tonight's program, I just want to lay a couple of ground rules. If you've never used Zoom before, or if you need a reminder, there's a couple of tools down at the bottom toolbar there that we're going to use tonight. One of them is the chat function, which is just sort of open and an opportunity for you to interact with either the panelists or other participants. And then we're also going to use the question and answer feature. It's called Q&A down there at the bottom. If you have questions that you would like us to address either in writing or live answered audibly, then please go ahead and type your question in the Q&A. Sometimes it can be very difficult to monitor the chat. I can already see it moving up on my screen already. So please use that question and answer. It's a lot easier for us panelists to pay attention to the question and answer than it is to follow the chat. Also, please refrain from using the raise your hand feature. It just creates a green flash on the screen for those of us that are presenting, and we find it to be a little bit distracting. So please try to refrain from that if you can. Okay, we're super excited to be launching this project with our partners, and I'm going to give each of them a chance to introduce themselves. And then Katie Lampke, who will be leading most of the program this evening, will introduce herself and get started. So Bill, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you, Rich. I'm Bill White with the Missouri Department of Conservation, and I serve as the branch chief for our community and private land conservation branch. And I became familiar with the Bumblebee Atlas a year ago and used it on the family farm in Nebraska, got used to it, and I thought, man, why don't we have something like this in Missouri? So started talking to partners, and everybody was all for it. And I'd like to say, if it wasn't for the 4 partners represented here tonight, we wouldn't be able to put this on. If Xerces Society wasn't interested, if MU wasn't interested, if Quail Forever wasn't interested, this would not be going on tonight. So appreciate the partners. Thank you.
And I'm Casey Berthold. I'm the Missouri State Coordinator with Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. We're the habitat organization while we fly the quail flag. Our biologists, and we've got quite a few of them scattered around the state who work with private landowners, work on natural community management. And they know that great habitat for quail, great habitat for bumblebees and other pollinators. And so we're really excited about this project and getting to be a part of it. So thank you all.
And my name is Debbie Finke. I'm with University of Missouri College of Agriculture, Food, and Natural Resources. So we say CAFNR. And I'm an insect ecologist, and my team is interested in pollinators, pollinator habitat. We're going to help verify some of the IDs of all the bees that people submit.
And my name is Katie Lampke, and I work for the Xerces Society as a bumblebee conservation specialist. So I coordinate the Nebraska Bumble Bee Atlas, and I'll be doing a lot of work with the Missouri Bumble Bee Atlas as well. And so I'm going to share my screen here, and it's just going to be a continuation from last night's presentation. Hopefully most of you were able to see that. And tonight we're going to go over more of the in-depth details and what it looks like to participate, how you actually get signed up. Okay, can everybody see that? Okay. So tonight, as I just mentioned, we're going to go over how to adopt a grid cell, the different types of surveys that you can run, and then we have a couple of videos that Rich and I have prepared that will sort of familiarize you with how to catch bumblebees, how to photograph bumblebees, everything that we would have done in person, but you know, safety concerns this year, we're all online. So we've developed videos that will hopefully help you become familiar with these concepts. And then after we go over those videos, we're going to dive into the identification of some of the bumblebees that you might find in Missouri. So first, when signing up for the Atlas, you need to go adopt a grid cell. So the way to do that is by signing on to MissouriBumbleBeeAtlas.org, excuse me, MO.bumblebeeatlas.org/grid cells. And it'll bring you to a page that has this map here. And you can use the search bar, you can zoom in and out, you can find your house or wherever you're trying to adopt a grid cell. And there's a little form that you fill out right beneath the map that just asks for your name, your zip code, a couple of other key information pieces. And then you should get a confirmation email once you submit the form saying that you have adopted your grid cell. And so once somebody adopts a grid cell, it will turn this mustard yellow color that you see on the screen. And so the goal is that we will have people adopt grid cells all over the state so that we can spread out. And before you adopt a grid cell, you need to sign up for Bumblebee Watch. And so creating an account on this website, bumblebeewatch.org, is free and really simple to do. So if you haven't done that already, that's where you need to start. And in the top right corner, you can go to the sign up, sign in button. And again, it's just going to ask you some simple questions like your name, email address. And you want to make sure that you use the same email address for Bumblebee Watch that you do when you sign up to adopt a grid cell, because that information is how we're going to tie your data together. So once you have your account, you're basically going to have a profile on Bumblebee Watch. And your username is going to be displayed at the top, and you're going to need that when you go to submit your data. You're going to type in your username when you adopt that grid cell and you submit observations. And this is also going to keep track of different bumblebees that you see, so you can always go back and edit observations. You can see what other observations people are finding in Missouri and pretty much all over the United States and Canada. And we have a participant handbook, so everything that we're going over in these videos is online, and you can print it out or read it online if that's easier for you. It goes over really detailed instructions on how to set up that account, how to adopt your grid cell. It describes the 2 different types of surveys that we're going to go over now, and it shows you how to submit your data. So if the video is not quite doing it for you, you can find the participant handbook online. Rich probably posted it in the chat if you need any other questions answered. So first, when running surveys, there's 2 different types of formal surveys. And when you adopt a grid cell, you're going to need to run 2 formal surveys. anytime between June and September in your grid cell. And these can be a point survey or a roadside survey. So we're gonna go into details of that, and then I'm gonna talk about incidental observations. So the first type of survey, if this wants to go forward, we've got a stall here on the PowerPoint, sorry, is a point survey. And these are the most common types of formal surveys that people run. And this is just you selecting anywhere within your grid cell that's about 1 hectare. And this is going to be a 45-minute survey, and that's by person minutes. So if there's 2 of you, you can divide that 45 minutes in half. And after you run your bumblebee survey, you're going to do a quick habitat assessment. And the good thing about these point surveys is that you're spending a longer amount of time in one area, so you're likely to encounter a lot of species. You get a lot of detailed information about one place, and there's fewer logistics compared to doing a roadside survey where you have to sort of find your route ahead of time. The bad side to these is that we're only really surveying one point in a very large cell, and because of that, we might miss some species that are maybe in a neighboring cell. So the next type of survey that you can run are called roadside surveys. And these are really good if you are in an area that has a lot of private lands. Roadside surveys are a good way to get around that. And you can just pull off on the right-of-ways and just do your surveys there. So to do a roadside survey, you're gonna select a route. It's really easy to do this on Google. If you just zoom in and out of the map, you can find some dirt roads or paved roads. You wanna find a stretch that's about 10 miles long, and you're gonna do 5 15-minute surveys along that 10-mile stretch. So as long as these patches of flowers that you're surveying are at least a half mile apart, that's all we need. And then after you do your bumblebee survey, you're going to do a habitat assessment at each one of your stops. And so the good side to habitat or roadside surveys is that it lets us see a lot more of that grid cell, right? Because we're traveling through, we're not just looking at one point in the grid cell. You may go through a whole bunch of different habitat types and different species can be encountered. And these are generally easier to access. There's not a lot of hiking in. You can just pull off on the side of the road, jump out, do your surveys. The bad side is that roadsides tend to be covered with many invasive types of plants. And one of the goals that we're trying to accomplish through this Bumblebee Atlas is finding what native plants bumblebees are utilizing on the landscape. These are also shorter surveys, so you might not encounter as many bumblebees because we're spending less time there. If you do roadside surveys, we suggest wearing some sort of safety gear so that people can see you though while you're out there. And then apart from formal surveys, we do allow incidental observations. And so these do not count towards your 2 surveys that you would run for the Atlas project, but these can be anytime, they can take place anywhere. You don't need to do a habitat survey with them. You essentially just submit a photo to Bumblebee Watch, and you can do that online or through the app. This may be while you're walking the dog or while you're out at a park. It could be before June or after September. Anytime you're seeing a bumblebee that's not part of a survey, you can still submit that observation. So these, like I said earlier, less time consuming, can take place anywhere. The only bad thing about these ones, this is why we don't allow them as a formal survey, is because there's no measure of effort, right? We don't know how long you spent searching for that bee. We don't know what the habitat is like, but if you still see a bee, we would like you to submit it if you want to. So then when it comes to actually conducting a survey, you sort of look at it in 4 steps. And the first step is to plan that survey. So you want to look through Google Maps and find where you're going to go in your grid cell. And once you adopt that grid cell, you can select anywhere to go survey in that cell that you would like to. Steps 2, 3, and 4 are going to be covered in the videos that we watch. So we're just going to look at step 1. And when we talk about planning your surveys, you want to remain flexible. So bees are going to be out in weather that's between 60 and 90 degrees usually. Once it gets above that or below that, the conditions just aren't very appropriate for them to be foraging. You want to go on a day that has winds that are less than 15 to 20 miles an hour. And this might seem obvious to some, but bees are not going to be out when it's raining. So pay attention to the weather before you go out, and look at your route if you're doing a roadside survey, and then make sure you're doing it between June and September. This PowerPoint's very slow tonight. And when you're trying to choose a place to survey, you can look for natural areas, you can look for parks, gardens. These could be at schools or libraries. You can look at public roadsides and right-of-ways, but pay attention to the width of them and where the private land starts. Wherever you choose to go, make sure you're following all of the posted rules and regulations. And then you want to make sure that you have all your materials before you get out there. So this includes your data sheets and your pencils, your insect nets, your vials. And when we talk about vials, you want to bring about 20 vials. You might not use all of those vials, but it's better to have more vials rather than having to recycle them. And it could take a lot of time if you don't have enough vials with you. So try to bring about 20 vials with you. You want to bring a cooler that has crushed ice in it, a camera to photograph the bees. You're going to need something to take your location down. So some sort of smartphone or a GPS unit, a timer to make sure that you're doing a 45-minute time, a weather device. Again, you can just use an app on your smartphone, as well as field guides. If you want to try identifying your bees or your plants out in the field, it's very useful to have these, as well as paper maps. There might be some places that you go that don't have access to cell phone service, so it's always nice to have a paper map on copy with you on hand. And we have all of that stuff listed in the handbook as well. And so when we talk about photographing bees, you're going to bring a cooler with ice in it and place your bees in a vial in that cooler. And what that does is it essentially chills the bee to a point where it becomes immobile and it doesn't harm the bee. And so then it allows you to take the bee out and take photos of it while it's still. And so these photos, we need them to be very clear, because this is how we're going to do the identification and verify what species you're finding all over the state. And so to do that identifying, we need a picture of the hind leg, the face, the thorax, and the abdomen. And you can submit 3 photos to Bumblebee Watch, but if you can get all of those characteristics in one shot, like this photo here, that's plenty. But some people might need to do a dorsal or just a photo of the face. Whatever you need to get all 4 of those characteristics to us, that will work. So now I'm going to play the first video here, and it's about 20 minutes. Let me switch screen shares. Didn't work.
Hi, my name is Rich Hatfield. I'm a senior conservation biologist for the Xerces Society, and I'm here to teach you how to do a survey for the Northwest Bumble Bee Atlas or the Nebraska Bumble Bee Atlas. They both have pretty much the same survey protocols. So here today, I'm in a beautiful natural area. It's a nice warm sunny day. I've got my net and I have some files in my pocket, so I'm pretty much ready to do a survey. The first thing you want to do is make sure that the site is big enough. It needs to be about a hectare. And a hectare is about the size of a football field, lengthwise, square. So it's sort of a football long and the same distance wide. It's 100 square meters, so a football field, including the end zones. Another way to think about it is the infield of a track. If you ever ran track, the entire infield on the inside of a running track is about a hectare, or a soccer field is also about a hectare. So you want to make sure it's big enough. And usually what I do once I decide that it's a big enough site is I walk around and I make sure that there's enough flowering resources. You want to make sure that there is something that bees could be visiting. Otherwise, it's probably not worth really conducting a survey, or maybe come back to them later today when there are flowers.
your site is make sure you're keeping an eye out for inconspicuous flowers. Sometimes flowers will grow down amongst grass, but they can't be important for bumblebees and often are. This plant is on self-heal and often grows underneath the understory or overstory of grass and is a great bumblebee plant.
Not working.
So Katie, while you're working on that, I'm just gonna take a couple of questions that have been, or at least one question that's been put into the question and answer here. So someone was wondering where they could find sampling tubes. If you go to the resources page on our website, it does have links for places to find nets and places to find vials. That said, you can find vials almost anywhere. Craft stores are a fine place to find them. You can often find them at the dollar store. Little jewelry boxes or old pill boxes work fine. You can also find them on Amazon if you just search for either 30 milliliter centrifuge tubes or 50 milliliter centrifuge tubes. Those are really good sizes to use. And you should be able to find some decent sources for 10 or 20 of them for relatively inexpensively. They shouldn't cost a whole lot of money. And we will be posting these videos. In fact, these videos are already on the website. You can watch them directly already. They're, if you go to the online training function of the website, you will find them there. There's another question here. Again, people are using the chat to ask questions. If you have questions that you'd like to have addressed, please try to use the question and answer portion. It's easier for us to find them. Someone's asking if the chilling process kills the bee. And it definitely does not kill the bee. It just puts them in a state of torpor. It essentially shuts down their physiology for a little while. But once they warm up back up to the ambient temperature, they will fly away as though nothing has happened. So that shouldn't be, it's not really an issue. I've been doing this for several years now with thousands of bees, and I've never lost a single bee from just chilling it. You're gonna try to get this again here?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Rich Hatfield. I'm a senior conservation biologist for the Xerces Society, and I'm here to teach you how to do a survey for the Pacific Northwest Bumble Bee Atlas or the Nebraska Bumble Bee Atlas.
How is that working?
It's better. It's better.
Okay.
Yep, the audio is much better. The dubbing is a little off, but it seems fine from my perspective.
Okay. Just chime in if we need to stop it.
They both have pretty much the same survey protocols. So I'm here today. I'm in a beautiful natural area. It's a nice, warm, sunny day. I've got my net and I have some vials in my pocket, so I'm pretty much ready to do a survey. The first thing you want to do is make sure that the site is big enough. It needs to be about a hectare. And a hectare is about the size of a football field, lengthwise, square. So sort of a football long and the same distance wide. It's 100 square meters. So a football field, including the end zones. Another way to think about it is the infield of a track. If you ever ran track, the entire infield on the inside of a running track is about a hectare, or a soccer field is also about a hectare. So you want to make sure it's big enough. And then usually what I do once I decide that it's a big enough site is I walk around and I make sure that there's enough flowering resources. You want to make sure that there is something that bees could be visiting. Otherwise, it's probably not worth really conducting a survey, or maybe come back at a later date when there are flowers. One of the things you want to do when you're out pre-walking your site is make sure you're keeping an eye out for inconspicuous flowers. Sometimes flowers will grow down amongst the grass, but they can be important for bumblebees and often are. This plant is called self-heal and often grows underneath the understory or overstory of grass and is a great bumblebee plant. Another important thing when we're out looking for bumblebees is we want to make sure we're looking at all blooming plants. If I was standing here looking in this patch, I might be drawn to the violets, to the dandelions, or maybe to the bluebells over here. But in reality, one of the most attractive plants in this patch has green, inconspicuous flowers, but bumblebees love it. This is a plant called waterleaf, and the flowers aren't quite open yet because it's still very early in the season here. But these little green guys here are gonna bloom into little, beautiful little flowers that hang down sort of under the understory, and they often can't be seen. But bumblebees like Bombus flavifrons and other long-tongued species really love these flowers and will visit them. So while you may not be drawn to them with your own eyes, it's really important to pay attention to what's blooming and making sure that we're spending time looking at all the flowering resources on the landscape, looking for different species of bumblebees. Other things you may want to look for as you're doing a pre-walk around your site are things that may be a potential hazard. You may want to avoid plants like poison oak or blackberry, although it is notable that both of these plants do flower and can be attractive to bumblebees. You'll also want to look out for holes or other things to avoid, like electric lines, fences, barbed wire. Just make sure you're safe while you're doing your survey. You also want to keep an eye out for property lines to make sure you're not crossing from public land onto private land. And also keep an eye out for areas that you may want to spend a couple more minutes, areas with high quality forage that you know are especially attractive to bumblebees. Or keep an eye out for blooming trees, meaning don't forget to look up. There are sometimes flowers that are above your head that can also be attractive to bumblebees. Once you've finished your pre-walk, you're ready to start your survey. Materials that you want to make sure that you have with you before you begin your survey are an insect net, jars to place your bumblebees, a cooler with crushed ice. Make sure you have a timer. And then for processing your bees, you'll need your data sheets as well as a camera. We recommend having a dedicated camera, ideally with a macro function, but in a pinch, a smartphone can work as long as you learn how to control your white balance and take high quality photos with it. I typically set up a station in the middle of my survey area, which has the cooler and the area where I'll process the bees later. And then I grab a handful of vials and head out to go conduct my survey. And when you're conducting your survey, you want to make sure it's 45 minutes long. And that's 45 person minutes. So if you're doing it with a friend, you would do it for 22 and a half minutes. And if you did it with two other friends, it would be for 15 minutes. You just want to have 45 total minutes of search time. The important thing also is that when you're doing a survey, you want to pause the timer while you catch a bee. So it's 45 minutes of searching, not 45 total minutes. So you want to pause the timer when you catch a bee and while you're putting that bee into a vial and while you're putting that vial into the cooler. That doesn't count for your search time. The other thing that's important while you're doing your survey is you want to make sure that you're associating every bee observation that you have with a flower. So one of the important things about the Atlas project is we want to learn what resources that bees are using. So while you're out collecting bees off of flowers, you want to make sure to record that information so that we can gather it later and use that information when we analyze the data from the project. So with each bee that you capture, you want to also record the flower on which you captured it. Catching a bumblebee in a net is not an easy task. It takes a lot of practice. So one of the things that we recommend is that you spend some time practicing in your backyard before you go out and actually conduct your survey. That way you'll get some competency and some confidence so that when you see a bumblebee during your survey, you'll actually be able to net it. There are really two different ways to go after a bumblebee on a flower. One way is to just swing your net and try to catch it in there like this. The important thing is after you've swung, you want to make sure to turn your net over to close the bottom of it so that the bee doesn't come flying right out into your face. There's a number of ways to do that. I like to do a little flip, but the easiest way to do it is to swing and then just turn the net over 1-2 times. And then you'll have the bee in this section of the net that's laying over the top. The other way to go after a bee instead of sweeping is to just go over the top and drop the net on the bee like that. That way the bee will be trapped in the net. The next step then would be to grab the bottom of the net and pull it up to the top, and the bee will fly right to the top of the net because it's attracted to the sun. Let's see if we can find some bees to practice on. Sometimes you just have to go and follow for her a bit. She looks like she's looking for a nest, so they can be really hard to track. But we can just throw the net over the top of them like that sometimes while they're flying. And I got her. I can see her moving in the net there. So what I do is I pull the net then up to the top and make sure she's under there. I see her right in there, and then I can put her in the vial. Okay, so now that I have a bee in the net, what I need to do is get the bee from a net into the vial. And the way I'm going to do that, she's somewhere in this folded over area. I can see her crawling around right here. And so what I want to do is make sure she gets all the way down to the bottom of the net. So what I can do is I can just take the net and just go back and forth a couple of times and then fold it over, and then I like to grab it when I know she's above my hand here. So I know that she's between my hand and the bottom of the net. And then I can take my jar, take the top off, but I want to keep that cap close by. And so then what I do is I stick the jar into the net, and it goes through my hand here, okay, so that there's no way for the bee to get out. And then what I can do is just sort of move the net around until I'm sure that I have the bee in the net. And unfortunately, my net is very dirty, so it's hard for me to see. But I can hear her. I know she's in there. And usually you'll hear that sound when you know she's in your jar. I know that she's in the jar, and now I can just use the net basically as the top of my jar. So I'm just gonna reach my hand in, and again, I'm gonna grab that plastic vial, and I'm just pulling the top of the net over the top of the jar, so the net is still serving as the top until I get to the edge, and then I'm just gonna slide it directly into and put the cap directly on, and then I can close the top and I can see the bee there in the jar. And that is how you transfer, or at least one method for transferring a bee from a net into a jar. Okay, so now I want to show you another method for getting a bee from a net into a vial. You can see the bees crawling around in the vial right here. And I'm sorry, in the net right there, and I want to get her into the vial. So one thing is a good thing to do. Some people just aren't comfortable holding the net while they do this, so they like to put it on the ground. But you can see if I hold the net straight up, the bee will fly all the way to the top of the net, okay? And then I can move forward. So some people just like to set it on the ground and then use the ground sort of as the cap, and then stick the vial into the net. And then again, same principle. You can pin the bee against the net as the top, and then you can stick your other hand in there and just put the cap on, and then you'll have the bee in the jar. Simple as that. And then what we want to do is we want to take the bee once it's in a vial, and we're going to put it into the ice pack. And it's ideal to stick it as far into the ice as we can so that the ice is completely surrounding the bee. And then it'll chill very quickly so that we can take the photographs that we need to take. Normally, one of the things that I would do in this situation is I would take the flower that I captured this bee on and I would put it into the jar so that later when I was processing my bees, I could know which flower that I caught this bee on. And keeping track of that is very important for the data we're collecting for the Atlas project. Or in this case, because this bee wasn't visiting a flower, it was just flying around, it's not going to have any floral association. So if I don't put a flower in there, then I'll know that when I process my data later. But if I'd captured this bee on, say, a dandelion, I could come over to a dandelion flower and just grab the flower off and pretty easily just tuck the flower into the jar with the bee. And then later when I process this bee, I'd have the flower and the bee in the same jar so that I can keep track of it. Other people like to take notes and have a notebook, and they will number their vial and say this would be bee number 1. They could go bee number 1 and they would write down the flower or take a picture of the bee next to the flower. There's lots of different ways to keep track of it. We don't care which way you do it. We just care that you do it. So when I finish my survey, I like to get a station set up to take my photographs. I want to make sure that I have everything I have and everything I need before I get started, because when I take the bees out of the cooler, they're going to start warming up, and I want to make sure that I have everything. So I want to make sure that I have my data sheet and a pencil that has lead in it. So I want to make sure I can take my notes. And I want to make sure that I have my camera. The other thing I like to do is make sure that my camera is set so the pictures I'm going to take are appropriate for the lighting conditions. So I usually will take a cap of a vial or something like that and make sure that I have my camera in the right settings before I get started, so I don't have to wait while the bee is warming up. So I get it in my macro setting and make sure that the pictures that I take look good. So here I am, I'm going to take a picture. And that looks pretty good. You can see here. It looks pretty good. I could probably add a little bit of light. It's a little bit dark, so I may change the white balance a little bit, but for the most part, it looks pretty good. So once I'm ready and I've got the information that I need, I can start processing my bees. But first I want to make sure I've filled out the top of my data sheet. So I have my site name and my grid cell ID in here, along with the date and the survey method, my weather information, and the surveyors and the survey time. All of that's entered on the data sheet, and I can get ready to enter the bees. Now each line on your data sheet here is going to represent a vial. So each bee that you captured gets its own line. So you're going to enter what bumblebee species that you think it is, its host plant, and then the photo numbers that you need, that you took of that bee. I'm going to move and process my bees in the direct sunlight here because it often will take a different picture or a better picture if you have direct sunlight. Sometimes it's too bright. You just have to take a look at the pictures that come out of your camera and adjust your settings and your location appropriately. And I can't stress this enough. I get way too many photos that people took that are out of focus or are too bright or are too dark. And if someone goes through all of this trouble of collecting bees, puts bees in jars and bees in the jars in a cooler, and then takes pictures that doesn't allow me to identify them, a lot of that effort has been wasted. So taking pictures is really the most important thing that you can do. And I want you to make sure to get your settings right and take the time you need to get the best pictures that you can. So I'm ready. My station's all set up. I have everything I need. I can grab my first bee out of the cooler. And once you take a bee out of the cooler, you'll know she's ready to be processed if you can kind of shake the jar back and forth, and she moves pretty freely in there. That's when you know she's ready to be processed. And so usually what I do is I'll just dump her out onto some surface, and if you have white, that's great. It works really well. Other colors can work too. Darker colors, just something that's flat and neutral usually helps pretty well. So one of the things that we can do when we look at our bee, you remember there's a lot of different photos that I need. I need to be able to see the picture of the face. I need to be able to see a picture of the thorax. And I need to be able to see a picture of the abdomen, including all of the segments back there. And for yellow-faced, yellow-striped bees, I need to see a picture of the underside of the abdomen. That allows me to tell the differences between some very close look-alike species. So when they're completely out is a great time to take a picture of that underside of the abdomen if you have that species. And in this case, I do. So I want to get really close if you can. And this is why a camera with a macro setting is really the best option. You want to get as close as you can, and you want to take a nice picture of the underside of the abdomen. Okay, so now I can see the color of those hairs on the abdomen, which is exactly what I need to see. Also, when she's in this position, I can often take a very good picture of the face. And it's nice to take a nice close-up like this, because then I can see the cheek length, as well as the color of the hairs on her face and the colors of the hair on the top of her head. I also like to include a profile shot like this, okay? And one of the nice things about a shot like this is I can see the hairs on the face, on the thorax, and on the abdomen. And now I want to be able to make sure that I can see every single segment on that abdomen, and then the color patterns there. So you want to sometimes peel those wings apart and make sure you get a nice clear shot. It's okay if your hand is in there, but we really just want to be able to see all of the segments back there on the abdomen. Perfect. And then she's ready. I've taken all of the photos that I need for her. You can see there that her foot is starting to twitch a little bit and she's starting to wake up. But I've taken all the pictures that I can of her. And so what I can do is I can actually just set her in the sun and let her warm up, and she'll slowly warm up and groom herself and fly away. And then I can go on and process the next bee. But before I do that, I want to make sure I enter this one on my data sheet. So because this has a yellow face and a yellow stripe, and you notice that all the hairs on the underside there were black, I know that this is Bombus vosnesenskii. And if you don't know the species of bee that it is, it's totally fine. You can just write Bombus here. And I'm going to write the host plant. In this case, there is no host plant. I found this bee just flying around, probably looking for a nest site. So I'm just going to write nest searching. And then I want to write the photo numbers. So in my camera here, I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to open up, and I'm going to take a look at the photos that I took. And down here, it's going to tell me the number of the photo that I took. And I want to record that information on the data sheet. So these photos started at 2319, and I'm going to write that on here, and that goes through 2324. Okay, and now that's all the photos that I've taken of that bee, and I've entered all the information that I need to from that particular bee on the data sheet. Now I can process my next bee. Again, I can shake the bee in the jar, and if she moves around freely, I know that she's ready to be processed. I can dump her out onto the table. And again, this is not a yellow-faced, yellow-striped bee, so I don't need a picture of the underside of the abdomen. I just need a picture that shows the face, head, thorax, and abdomen. And I can get a lot of that from a single shot with this bee, the way that she's set up. I can get a nice profile shot. And there I can see pretty much everything I need to from a single photo. I'm gonna roll her over on her back to make sure that I get a photo of the cheek length and of the face. Sometimes the antennae get in the way there, so you wanna make sure, if you can, to get the photo that you need. Okay, so there, really with just 2 pictures I can get everything that I need. But there, in this case, I can also get a nice shot there that'll show me every segment of the abdomen. And this species here is Bombus mixtus. It's got brown hairs at the very back of its abdomen, that little crescent on T2 there. And you can see it's got cloudy hairs on its thorax. So a mix of yellow and black hairs and a nice short cheek. So I'm done processing that bee, and I can put her in the sun as well. So now I can write this one as Bombus mixtus. She was also nest searching. And the photo numbers, again, I go into my camera, I press preview, and this goes through 2327. So this is gonna be 2325 to 2327. One of the things you can do when you're done processing your bees is you can actually hold them in your hands. It's a really neat opportunity to get up close and personal with a bee and see how they move their wings and groom themselves. It's a really, really neat opportunity. But they do warm up pretty quickly, and it's pretty neat to watch them fly away and notice that even after being in a cooler for a long time, they can go out about their business and just fly away. Oh, there she goes. When you're done with your bumblebee survey, we're going to ask that you also do a brief habitat survey. And there's just a series of questions that you have to answer as you walk around the site. There's some just basic site information at the top of the data sheet, and then we get into the habitat area. The first thing you want to do is decide what is the most appropriate habitat type for the place where you're doing your survey. And you're just going to circle one of those options. So in this case, I'm in a natural area, which is a park setting. So I would circle that. And then you would want to add in the habitat area of the surrounding area. So outside of your hectare, what habitat types do you see there? In this case, I see some woodlands and other areas. So I would include those in sight in addition to the developed park that I'm also in. The next question asks you, how much of the survey area has flowering resources available? And what you want to do there is really just think about, as you did your bumblebee survey, how far did you have to walk before you saw another flower? Were there flowers pretty much everywhere? Or did you have to walk between patches? And how much area did those patches take up? And I don't mean like to be 100% flowering or even 50% flowering. It doesn't have to mean that flowers actually take up 50% of the ground or 50% of what you see. It's really just you can see flowers or look for bumblebees on flowers in 50% of the site at which you're standing, or whatever percentage it is. So how much is flowering? In a site like this, on a day like today, we're probably talking about sort of probably 15 to 20% at the most is flowering resources, as you see here behind me. Here are some examples of what different percentages of flowering resources might look like in the Pacific Northwest. And here are some examples of what it might look like in Nebraska. Then we want to know how many species of flowers that there are. Are there 1 to 2, 2 to 5, 5 to 10, or greater than 10? And by this time, you will have already done your bumblebee survey, so you'll have a pretty good sense of how many flowering resources there are out there. The next thing you're going to do is circle which features you see in the area. And these are all features that are important for bumblebee nests. So did you see any bunch grasses? In this area, I'm in a park that's probably occasionally mowed. There are no bunch grasses here, so I wouldn't circle that. Do you see evidence of rodent holes or tunnels? I did. Do you see any brush piles? Yeah, there's brush piles along the edge here, so I'd include that. There is a fair bit of bare soil here, so I'd include that. There's leaf litter in the woodland areas and along the fence rows here, so I would circle that. Do I see any pine needle duff? Well, in the area behind me here, there are some pine trees, and there is quite a bit of pine duff on the ground there, so I'd also include that. I don't really see any rock piles here, so I would not circle that one, but those are what those options are. Those are all nesting areas for bumblebees, or areas or things that we think are important for nesting. The next question is all about management. Do you see any mowing here? In this case, I would answer yes, I do see mowing. There's no cattle grazing here, but there probably is some native grazing, maybe some deer. You might see some scat or some tracks, and you'd want to include that. There's no agriculture here. I don't think there's any insecticide or herbicide use, but I might ask the land manager if I had questions about it. There's no fire used here, and there are no honeybee hives. But your site obviously may be different, and you want to answer whatever it is that you have. And then on the back, you're just going to go around and you're going to list the plants that you saw in bloom, the common names, and if you know them, the scientific names. And then to help later, if you need to, you just want to record the photo numbers if you took a photo of those flowers. And that's it. The habitat survey should probably take you 15 to 20 minutes. If you have a lot of plants in bloom or you don't know your plants that well, it may take you a little bit longer. So make sure to leave yourself plenty of time. But we're hoping that this isn't going to be a several hour long habitat assessment. It should be fairly rapid, and you should be able to get through it fairly quickly, especially if you do it after you do your bumblebee survey, because you will have already walked the entire hectare property, and you should know the features pretty well by that time. But that's it. When you're done with that, you're done with your bumblebee survey, you're done with your habitat survey, and you can head home and enter your data. So anyway, thanks for being out in the field with me today, and thanks for participating in the Bumblebee Atlas projects. I really appreciate all your help. I couldn't do it without you. I'm sorry that we weren't able to be in person today and share bees together, but hopefully you learned something and feel more confident when June comes around and we can get out in the field and hopefully do our surveys. But again, I do want to remind you that I'm filming this in April, and this is a rapidly evolving situation. So really, please do pay attention to the health professionals in your area and pay attention to your local and state officials about what is safe for you. And also, please pay attention about your own personal safety. That is the most important thing, and there's no reason to jeopardize your personal health for any reason to go out and do bumblebee surveys. If you need to, go do a bumblebee survey in your backyard if that's the safest place for you to do it. We want to make sure that everybody is safe and healthy during this difficult time. But anyway, thanks for your attention, and we'll look forward to seeing you out in meadows looking for bumblebees. Have a great summer.
Okay, so we should probably mention that we filmed those before the Missouri Bumble Bee Atlas was around, but still very applicable. So I think we will take a few questions before we jump into the next video.
Yeah, there's a bunch of questions here, Katie.
Okay.
I'll throw them at you and you can answer. Can more than one person adopt a grid cell?
Yes, so you can adopt a grid cell like with a group of friends if you want to do that. But we're probably going to let about 6 people or so adopt a grid cell before we shut it off. So if there's one in an area that you know you want to survey, I would go in and adopt that as soon as you can.
How often do you get stung?
Not very often. Not very often. I feel like I've been stung less than 10 times. I feel like most times that you do get stung, it's on accident. Maybe you grab the bee in the net the wrong way. But I feel like they're pretty docile creatures. Do you have anything to add on that, Rich?
Yeah, I would say I've been doing this for around 20 years, and I'm still counting on my fingers how many times I've been stung. It's really quite rare, and when it does happen, it's like you said, there's an extra bee in the net that you didn't know about, and you end up pinching it or something like that and get stung. But it's really, really, really rare. Another question, if we only have a smartphone, should we not sign up for the project?
No, you can use your smartphone. That will work for everything.
Yeah, I would just add that, learning how to adjust the quality of photos that your camera takes on your smartphone is an important aspect. So just learning how to adjust the white balance or the brightness of the photo is really important, just to make sure we're getting to be able to see the features that we need for identification.
Yeah, and if you can't do that on your phone itself, a lot of the times when you upload it to the computer, you can do some quick edits to just brighten it up or darken it, whatever you need to do.
Yeah, and both Android and iPhones have, like, in addition to the native camera apps, have apps in the the Google Play Store or the Play Store or the Apple Store or whatever it's called, in the store that may give you more features or more editing capacity than the native apps do. So you can look for those as well. They're free. There are some that are free anyway.
Those and I forget what they're called, but those quick little macro lenses that you can buy now that are like $15, so you can just clip them right onto your smartphone, and that helps take some nice photos as well.
Yeah, those are great as well. What if you don't know the name of the flower?
You don't know the name of the flower, there are many different guidebooks that you can get. There's some PDFs, there's online resources, there are identification apps like iNaturalist, and I think there's one through Missouri Extension that's on the website that's linked. You can take photos of it. If you don't know the plant, we really suggest that you take a photo of it so that you can ID it later if you don't have the time to do it in the field. You can also post a photo of it to the private Facebook group, and maybe somebody else in the group knows what plant it is.
Yeah, I think the Missouri Department of Conservation also has some plant identification resources that you can use. But I will say, please, if you can, use each other. The Facebook group is a great way to do this. But we're going to be getting, hopefully thousands of bumblebee photos and observations, and we just likely won't have the capacity to identify flowers from photos. So if you can use the other resources that are out there to do that, it's incredibly helpful for us from just a time management perspective. And there are a lot of great resources. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'll say our Farm Bill biologists are very good at that, and they really enjoy doing that. So we'll get a few of them on that Facebook group and help out with flower identification on that side.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you, Casey. Approximately, another question, Katie, approximately how long do you have to process the bee before it becomes active?
Well, that's going to be dependent on the bee, but usually I'd say you have a good solid minute usually before they start twitching. But once they start waking up and vibrating those muscles, it becomes harder to take a photo because they're moving so quickly that you can't get a clear shot. So if that does happen and you're not done photographing the bee, just put it back in the vial and place it back in the ice chest and wait for it to cool down again. But there's usually enough time to take your photos.
Should you release a bee in the same area in which you captured it?
Yes. So when you're doing your point surveys, anywhere in that hectare, releasing the bee, they should be able to find their way back home. If you're doing a roadside survey, make sure you photograph and release your bees at each stop. If you keep driving for 10 miles, there's a chance that that bee will not find its way back to the colony.
How long would it take for a bee to suffocate in a jar?
I don't know that exact number, but I know that there have been bees left in jars, sometimes on ice, for more than a day, and they've survived. So if you're not planning on doing that, you should be good.
Yeah, the only thing I think in a cooler, that's certainly the case. But if you have a jar out in the sun, you can stress a bee out pretty quickly. So I would make sure to get them into a cooler. But once they're in a cooler, you're you've got a lot of time before I think you're going to harm a bumblebee. There's a question here about finding the file name for photos on smartphones. In the chat, I put instructions how to do that on an iPhone, and one of the participants put the instructions to find it on an Android phone. So that question should be answered there. I will download the chat from this and yesterday's webinar, and I can post them on the website if you'd like to, which will have all these links and all the information in there in case you need this information later. Another question here. So it sounds like a single person doing a 45-minute survey would take 2 to 3 hours. Is that about right?
Sounds about right if you include travel in there too. Yeah.
Yeah, we find that we can do about 2 surveys in a day. That cramming 3 in is possible, but it's a long day if you do that. So yeah, that's about right. Are we gonna get cool Missouri t-shirts like yours? We hope so. We hope so. Stay tuned.
We're hoping to.
Those are I think the most pertinent questions, Katie. Let's go ahead and move on to the data entry section. If more questions come up, please feel free to continue to add them in the Q&A, and we'll do that again after the next video.
Okay. All right, so I'm gonna share my screen here again. It's gonna be another short video on how you actually go in and submit your data online after you've conducted the survey. Okay.
Hi, my name is Rich Hatfield. I'm a senior conservation biologist for the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, and I'm here to teach you how to submit your bumblebee and habitat data to our databases for our Bumblebee Atlas projects, including the Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Atlas and the Nebraska Bumblebee Atlas. To do that, you're going to go here to Bumblebee Watch, and Bumblebee Watch can be found at the URL bumblebeewatch, all one word, no spaces, .org. And once you're there, you can navigate around and look around. You're going to need an account, and if you don't already have one, you'll need to register or log in if you already have an account. And once you're logged in, we would really appreciate it if you would go to your profile page just to make sure that you are registered for the Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Atlas or the Nebraska Bumblebee Atlas. And to do that, you are going to click on the your profile name or your username in the upper portion of the window there. So at the very top, you're going to click on welcome and whatever your username is. And in this case, I'm going to click on welcome RG Hatfield, which is my username on Bumblebee Watch. And then once you're at your profile page, you can edit your profile page by clicking on edit in the upper left-hand corner. And then if you scroll all the way to the bottom, it'll show you what project you're registered for. If you haven't changed this before, it will just say Bumblebee Watch. But we're asking that you click here and choose whatever project that you're working on, whether it's Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Atlas, Nebraska Bumblebee Atlas, or some other Atlas project that maybe we launch in the future. And then if you click Save, it'll save that project, and then you can begin to enter your Bumblebee data once you're saved there. So you can go to Record a Sighting and choose Bumblebee Sighting. And then it'll take you to the first page. And this is the page where you're going to enter your photos. You'll upload them there. And then also where you'll enter the site information and also talk about the flower host and other observations that you made. So the first thing you want to do is to upload your photos. And you have 2 options. You can just drag the photos from an open window into this gray box here, and it would upload the photo automatically, or you can choose files, and then it will open a window on your computer or whatever device you're using, and it will help you navigate to those photos. So if you click Choose Photos here, it'll open up the window, And you can see that I have my photos that are already organized sort of by year and by date. And so right when I get home from a survey, I like to download all of my pictures from my camera onto my computer and have them organized this way, which really helps me to enter my data later. So you want to make sure that you have your data sheet along with you so you can choose the right pictures for the first bee that you're entering. In this case, 2319 versus 2324 were the photos that I took. And you notice there's 6 photos there, but I can only enter 3 into Bumblebee Watch. So I want to make sure to be really careful and select the best 3 photos that I have. In this case, because I have a yellow face, yellow striped bee, I want to make sure to include that photo of the underside of the abdomen, of those sternal hairs. That's really important to distinguish between a few close lookalikes. So I'm going to choose that one, and then I'll choose this photo, which shows the cheek length and the face, and then I'll choose this profile one that shows the head, thorax, and all of the segments on the abdomen. And then I can